and welcome to Get the Table, another wrestling roundtable discussion podcast with myself, Adam Wilbourn, and the Dadley boys of WhatCulture, Michael Hamlet and Michael Sidgwick, here to discuss another burning wrestling issue. But before we get into it, if you're a fan of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to WhatCulture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts where we review Raw, SmackDown, pay-per-views, we have interviews, more roundtable discussions like this one, and a roundup of the week, complete with a bloody good quiz, of course, on WrestleCulture. But gents, we are gathered here today.
You keep saying this.
I'm going to get this over to discuss getting over in 2019. Very simple question. How on earth, as a wrestler, do you get over in 2019?
Simple question. Simple answer. You leave WWE. I mean, I'm not being funny, but like the two breakout stories like unfolding in wrestling at present are the dual rise between each G1 block of KENTA and Jon Moxley. They've got one thing in common. They were very much ruined by WWE, left WWE, were pushed as major forces by New Japan upon their debuts, and they're both over as hell, completely rejuvenated in very different ways.
Because New Japan aren't like a spiteful organisation, it's almost awkward having listened to Kevin Kelly try not to just talk so much about how these were just trapped in their former lives. He finds quite creative ways to talk about how they were maybe prisoners of a different system or they were creatively stifled or things like that, but it is just a black and white thing at this point. These two have come over almost straight from WWE, almost directly, within a matter of months. It's bizarre that we can look at, myself and Sidgwick were looking at the Royal Rumble 2019, first major show this year, and KENTA and Jon Moxley are both on that show. I don't want to say they feature on it, but they are a part of it.
Dean Ambrose drew number 14 in the Royal Rumble.
The cursed number, isn't it?
And as of today, he's just had his first ever 5-star match in the Wrestling Observer.
Yeah.
It's an incredible turnaround, and there's one thing that has led to it, and that is his departure.
Yeah, arguably the catalyst for this discussion is Jon Moxley, because I think it's fairly accepted that most people... when around that time we had that feud with Seth Rollins that WWE just ruined, just thought, I think that might be it, you know? I think that might be him done. And obviously we had high hopes, and he had an incredible, return, debut in AEW. But this isn't just a flash in the pan. This isn't just turning up at a rival promotion and attacking Kenny Omega and Chris Jericho. This is a consistent development of his, or a showcasing, I should say, rather than development, showcasing of his wrestling ability. And yeah, he's the hottest star in wrestling right now.
He's a global wrestling superstar by getting away from the biggest wrestling organisation in the world. That's the state we currently find ourselves in. This is not, one of them sort of blindly pro AEW podcasts when that product is so young, nor is this just us going on about a New Japan rubbish, as you'd say. This is like, he's basically used the entire wrestling world as a proving ground. He's done independent dates. He's picked the hardest sort of challenge that he can take in New Japan because he could have been exposed within one or two matches. He's going to show the world, 3 times a week that he's got it in him to be this flexible, malleable worker. And in AEW, he's gone in as a megastar. They have been quite careful not to rely on every WWE cast-off to try and build their cards, but they've been careful in who they've chosen. And in Jon Moxley, they've got this guy who has star power on night one, and then by the time they get to use him in a main event, which is going to be against Kenny Omega All Out, he's already proven himself as the wrestling part of the job, the elite wrestling part of the job has already been proven.
It's the full extent of what he's done to get himself over. Like, his genius ploy was to go on Talk as Jericho as a notoriously private individual and just go on this incredible rant, this cathartic rant to get himself over. He's talked the talk as effectively as CM Punk did, and he's gone and walked it. He's gone and walked the walk to an extent I didn't think was even possible.
No.
He's been amazing.
It's enhanced the love, hasn't it? Because you didn't realise you had it within you all along. You can like Dean Ambrose, the WWE Red Wagon guy, or the occasional Shield.
I don't like him.
Banger wrestler, but this guy, yeah.
It's just... the way in which he's done it has just impressed me so much. He's retained some of the comedy of Dean Ambrose, but done it so much better. That match against Ishii was just mind-blowing, a new breed of physicality. He's just wrestled a total banger with Shingo Takagi that... it was almost like Bret Hart in his strategy and his limb work. That's the comparison I would make. That's how great it was. But he did it in his own unique way. He's an expert promo, strategist, brawler. He's got a massive aura. He's just the best all-rounder. And what he's done is used the elusive creativity that eludes WWE stars and used it to get himself over, but like all of it.
You mentioned not just him, but KENTA there as well. I think... it was mixed emotions. I think once Jon Moxley went over to New Japan, people thought, well, we know he can wrestle relatively well, but let's see if he can, like you say, showcase that. Kenta's a kind of different one, isn't it? Because when he went to WWE, and we all had big hopes for him considering his history, and then he left and went to New Japan, obviously, which was a shock to quite a few people. And people thought, can he still do it? And obviously, he still can.
I think he's worked in harmony with the booking. His performance level's nowhere near what it was like in Pro Wrestling Noah in his pomp. And Kenta was one of the most revolutionary pro wrestlers of all time, in my opinion. And almost, if it wasn't for this amazing generation that's kind of surpassed him, you'd probably consider him one of the best ever, like certainly in ring. He's worked in harmony with the booking, who've just, again, pushed him with so much conviction is a massive deal, and slowly throughout the G1 he's sort of like developed his confidence. There was a great spot in his match with Evil where Evil wears eye makeup, and in one swift motion he just went like that, wiped it away from his face, and it just made it look like, you're a gimmick, I'm going to take that away from you and I'm the real deal. So he's got that mastery of psychology and like just the space between moves, where if he can't move like as effectively as he once did, he's got those working instincts to get himself over.
Confidence is the right word, because like perception can be reality in pro wrestling all the time. He's lined up now ready to fight Kazuchika Okada, and somehow we can receive that as one of the biggest matches in pro wrestling. Over the space of 6 weeks, Kent has gone from being like, and let's be honest, somewhat of a WWE cast-off. It wasn't like it was ever going to work there. This is not a Dean Ambrose situation where you think they could just turn the wheel and fix him. He was damaged goods from his WWE
They let
run.
him go?
Yeah,
That says it all.
They weren't fussed. He wasn't fussed. That was going nowhere.
In this era, they let him go.
Yeah, you're right. In the era of warehousing talent and in just trying to sign anybody on a just-in-case principle, really, Jinder Mahal gets a 5-year deal. Like, we're at the point now where we both named Jinder Mahal, and you think, yeah, but like, if he got sick of things and tried the G1, maybe that would work. It probably wouldn't, but these guys have given you hope that, like, now I think WWE is looking so, I don't want to say the word toxic, but like in terms of talent and creativity, it feels like an environment that's there more to stifle what wrestlers might still have lingering within them.
Well, you mentioned WWE there, and obviously it's not just as simple as leaving WWE, because you have to have a plan, or you'll have to, go and express yourself, and as I said, showcase what you can do. It's not just about leaving and going anywhere else. But if we're talking about WWE, there is a chance to still get over in WWE. How do you go about it? Because Bray Wyatt is a perfect example.
You benefit, I think, from the state of the company. So everything is so disposable now, and everything is so week to week, that within 2 weeks, where you thought this character was dead and buried, and how many times was Bray Wyatt dead and buried, only for him to go away and disappear? So that time away from the product all of a sudden makes you feel fresh again. It's the old adage of a wrestler getting injured is sometimes the best thing for them if you're kind of sick of them. But now I look at a character like Ember Moon heading into SummerSlam, who 2 weeks ago was having her switch broken by Mandy Rose and Sonya Deville, and that was of her primary concern. She wins 2 matches. She's treated seriously by not being booked like a total goof, and all of a sudden she's a credible challenger for a title. That's how quickly they can fix somebody, because just one morning Vince McMahon can wake up and decide, I want to push them. The mechanisms are still there to push somebody, but it's so week to week that what you got 1 week could completely disappear the next. Everything is thin ice. Bray Wyatt, what's been one of the key features of all our Bray Wyatt discussions is that, please don't screw this up. Please don't screw this up. Your favourite thing can fall through the cracks like that in WWE, and it's just a shame that like that's the price you have to pay for the fact that they can also fix talent as well.
Is there a blueprint to getting over in WWE anymore?
There's not so much a blueprint. I think one of the major problems that they face, particularly since they need something short-term to reassure fans that, look, we're heading in the right direction, is that getting Vince McMahon's respect from the outside looking in seems like such a arduous, long process. And I'm looking at someone like Kofi Kingston, and this process has, in fact, informed his arc this year, the whole 11 years thing. There's the famous story that Chris Jericho relayed in one of his autobiographies that Vince McMahon just did a snide remark to Kofi Kingston and said, maybe one day he'll get over. And this naturally pissed Kofi off. But because of the culture, he was just like, well, I can't really say anything because, he terrifies us all. And Chris Jericho said, no, stick up for himself. Challenge him. And this led to an amateur wrestling match on an aircraft because these things are ridiculous. But and there was the stories that Kofi and Big E and Xavier Woods have said that over the course of developing the New Day to its final form that we're pretty much seeing now, it was such a painstaking process of, can we do this? No. But what if we did it this way? Yeah, maybe try it out. And there's no conviction in it. It's like he has no belief until these things happen, you know? It takes ages to get over, if you can get over at all.
The New Day are a fascinating example of that, because Xavier Woods, PhD, like, he used that academia for the greater good of the New Day. I've heard interviews with them before where they've said they knew from day one that was going to be a heel gimmick. They came out clapping and dancing, and they knew that this was going to get them over as heels. And not once could they dare pitch that to Vince McMahon. Like, well, should we just be heels straight away? What do you mean? People love this. People love this. That's good like that.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, let's just turn this as loud as we can possibly make it until the point where we know we're going to get booed.
Yeah.
And then he'll hear the crowd. He won't listen to us, but he'll hear the crowd. And then suddenly you had the New Day sucks chance in response. He believed that New Day Rocks was going to be this Austin 316 phenomenon when all they could hear was like, eventually we'll get them to say sucks. And then eventually he'll have to hear that. But to think about that being how you approach your career with your body is such a strange setup. I think of the likes of Sasha Banks getting the call up from NXT and being too frightened to speak to Vince McMahon, so would rather have Triple H as the conduit, and look how much we hear about them clashing. So no wonder half of those NXT guys fail, because if they're the ones that Triple H is going to bat for, is he not the new Paul Heyman behind the screen? Is he not like the one now where Vince being like, oh, not another one of your little guys, Paul, come on, give me a Lars.
Yeah, the thing is, getting over in WWE is quite simple if you look like a Lars Sullivan, because they'll look at you and treat you a certain way. But I'm not going to give a name, but let's just say whoever comes up next from NXT, whether that be, well, I'm not going to give any names, because I don't want to.
You don't want to jinx them.
Jinx this, yeah. But like, how would they get over if they didn't look like a Lars Sullivan or a Braun Strowman? What's the first thing that they have to do?
Well, I don't know, because it's one gigantic paradox, because by all accounts, you kind of have to show to Vince that you can stand up for yourself and that you've got ideas and that you can take criticism on the chin and just speak to him directly. But the paradox is, like, the culture, by all accounts, is so, like, terrifying. It's an eggshells environment. I've heard that expression used over and over again, that how can you do that when it's so daunting, so imposing? So, yeah, I've got no earthly idea, because if you look at that roster and you're true to yourself and you try and park both the bright-eyed, cockeyed optimism and the default cynicism and think who's truly all the way over in that company, and you're left with a very short list, like a very, very short list of people.
Yeah, key is just go in there and punch Vince McMahon on your first day and say, this isn't good and then that's it. I want to move on, because I want to talk about not just getting over, but staying over. How many times?
That's harder.
How many times have we seen stars? I mean, Finn Balor is a person who literally jokes about it on social media. Come in, have this huge impact, and then slowly sort of either not necessarily fall off the map, but just slowly wane a little bit. And I also want to mention in this, Seth Rollins, especially right now, and Braun Strowman, who's arguably going in an opposite trajectory now, finally got back on the upswing.
Staying over, kind of, to go back to kind of what I said before, is a matter of Vince McMahon's wins week to week. He could get bored of guys. A one for me lately, just because he was a personal favourite, was being the key word, is someone like Bobby Roode. So Bobby Roode came in with that incredible theme tune, which is going to help you upon starting, but then immediately the booking lost interest in him. The character work was pretty careless, and then he got that 1 week restart because they changed his name to Robert and they gave him a mustache. Like, that got at least enough Twitter buzz where people were quite interested in the gimmick and quite interested to see what would happen on week 2. Nothing happened on week 2. He didn't feature. So even when something gets over on one of their weird viral metrics, look how many times that's been shared, it's still not interesting enough. With that great theme and with all that potential that he once had, it's still not enough to keep him on television, and all of a sudden the beard's back.
But to go to Seth Rollins and Braun Strowman, the Seth Rollins promo on Monday Night Raw, like, it not only did it make me cringe to a point where I kind of wanted to die, it actually terrified us, because if you consider the audience, it got the 3 million rating that they wanted, and they anticipated it, which is why they did the reunion in the first place. They knew the most possible eyes were going to be watching that show, and it was on that show specifically that Vince said, right, it's time for a John Cena promo. It's time for the lamest such good imaginable, because that's what he thinks is the best fit for the most amount of eyes. So I was terrified by that. And yeah, you can't stay over when literally every top level WWE male babyface has to do Cena stuff. We saw it with Roman, the suffering succotash. We saw it in 2016, I think, with Rollins already, with the sparkle crotch.
Yep.
And now with the... that Lesnar impression, man. It was absolutely awful.
He said he listened to Ambrose's podcast, and he said so if he listened, he heard what we all heard about the pooper scooper. Ambrose was wise enough to know you can't leave that in because that becomes a prop, or you can't leave this line in because he'll have me doing this. And then he's out there doing Godzilla impressions and stupid Brock Lesnar impressions. He's reading it in the script. He knows what's there.
You can't stay over when you're getting told, right, you're the new John Cena, which we've seen time and time again. In contrast, however, Strowman's been quietly building a bit of confidence in me.
He got punished a bit after WrestleMania, didn't he?
He got punished a bit after WrestleMania because apparently they weren't happy with his performance level nor his attitude. The reports circled that his disposition's not really great for the backstage etiquette that they require. But in the last few weeks, he's been really good at the big daft spectacles, like at Extreme Rules. And I was really heartened by his total destruction of that jobber on Raw, because it feels like, and by all accounts, it's a Paul Heyman project, that they're trying to go back to basics. And in contrast to Rollins, they're not doing the comedy so much with Braun that they were really doing last year, and it was just failing miserably. So yeah, that's kind of got me a little bit inspired.
The thing is, WWE fans aren't sitting there going, I don't want to be getting this stuff over. Like, we are actively, even as like the journalists or reporters or whatever you want to call yourselves, we're sat
I'm
there.
not a journalist.
We're sat
I'm not
there,
a reporter.
We're sat there watching it, and as much as we want to critique it and stuff, we'd far rather sit there and say that was a great... Like SmackDown, we really enjoyed SmackDown this week.
Yeah, it's an inconvenient truth for every comment section that wrestling writers and wrestling observers, to use one of a better phrase, don't want to enjoy wrestling. It's ridiculous. It's like... we wouldn't dedicate so much time to it. Wouldn't make myself tired for days after watching that 3-hour Raw that felt like 6 on a Monday. It's just, I think what you want as well is, because anyone that's ever gotten into wrestling has probably done so because something has actually captivated them. I don't know anybody that ever started watching wrestling because of something they hated. It's something you unfortunately learn the more you watch it, because you've at some point been given an example of something that you adore. Even if between me and another fan, what we love, we completely disagree on, that's what we both love. So it can give you both. It can give you examples of the things you once liked done better or done differently. And yet I think it always comes back to these conversations that, like, it's systemic. But I think that the way that the product is set up behind the scenes now makes it incredibly difficult, because if you just said it yourself there, Cedric, if Braun Strowman is a Paul Heyman guy right now, what if Paul Heyman isn't a Vince McMahon guy in 6 weeks? Braun Strowman is the guy likely to suffer that fate. It's still always that audience of one, and it takes incredible luck and timing and patience to have Vince McMahon's ear and to have his counsel for as many years as the likes of the Austins and Hogans did.
Now, we're just as guilty as everyone else in terms of sitting around the office and fantasy booking people, and yet it seems a lot simpler than WWE seems to make it when in terms of getting people over. You know, we sat here before and have sort of fantasy booked Bray Wyatt from now until, say, WrestleMania 36. And it strikes me that whenever you hear Paul Heyman talk about someone like that, he says, OK, what's the end point? OK, and let's work back from there and stagger it. And it strikes me, like you say...
Good luck with that.
WWE... shoot themselves in the foot consistently, because they just say, oh, right, well, we need to pop a rating next week, so we'll pull the trigger on this far too early or whatever. You know, like the Ambrose... Rollins stuff, we said you could have dragged that out. You could have been better, arguably, if you'd dragged that out to WrestleMania, not once they actually got their teeth into it.
Cedric will remember the exact interview better than me, but Daniel Bryan laughed off the very idea that the company could book 3 months in advance. I want to say that he was being interviewed around October, November time about The Miz?
No,
WrestleMania
he was
something
still
like that?
a babyface,
Yeah.
and I think it was ahead of SummerSlam, possibly. And sorry, there's a really good Gorilla Position podcast.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
Yes.
And the guy very earnestly interviewed Daniel Bryan and said, like, look, everyone wants Bryan versus The Miz at WrestleMania, and just he, as you said, he laughed. He laughed out
burst
loud.
out laughing, didn't he?
Laughed out
Yeah.
loud and said, and I quote, "Let me answer your question with a question. Do you trust, essentially, my boss to get to that story at WrestleMania 35?" And then burst out laughing at his face. You know, they're just, it's week to week. They simply cannot do these things.
You mentioned long-term booking.
And you know what happened in the end? Miz was the face going into WrestleMania, and Daniel Bryan was the heel. It didn't just not happen.
I thought you were gonna
Everything
say-
changed.
I thought you were going to say, well, you know what happened at the
I got a
end?
pasty.
Yeah, you were one pasties from me. One name we haven't mentioned here is Becky Lynch. That's another way of getting over, arguably. And I was sort of going to use that to talk about potential in the future of getting over. Is social media, because arguably her Twitter game was half the reason why people got behind her, is that going to become more and more important?
I think so. I don't yet think that all wrestlers have quite figured it out. I don't think there's one working formula, because sometimes I'd rather see somebody stay entirely in gimmick on social media. Other times it's quite pleasing to see what they do in their real life. So there's no sort of exact science, I think, with that one. And what worries me, because I don't like this phrase because it means we have a long way on, is that the Becky Lynch push of last year, and the movement behind Becky Lynch is a bit of a once-in-a-generation thing in wrestling. That doesn't come around very often, and that magic you feel that morning after Nia Jax punched her in the face and she stood in the crowd with the blood on her nose, and you're looking on the Twitter and it's all you can see is that feeling, that as all wrestling fans that we know that feeling. You do worry that that's a once-in-a-generation, and we've had ours now. That's it for like 5 years. It's not going to be, because Vince McMahon didn't create that, did he? Nia Jax created that, and Becky Lynch rolled literally with the punches and made that work. So I worry that the attempts, the try-hards on social media will kill that gimmick before it has a chance to work time and time again to get guys over.
What do you think going forward in the future for getting over?
On social media?
Or wherever, or how you think it's going to work going forward?
Yeah, the thing about social media is that, again, you see it on social media, you see it particularly with the WWE.com exclusives. Any platform on which these human beings get to be human beings, they are exponentially more engaging, likeable than they are under the scripted confines of WWE TV, and yet none of it, or very little of it, carries over. So there's always one answer, and I think we're going to record another podcast, and the answer is going to be exactly the same. If your breath stinks, get rid of the dead tooth.
There you have it. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below or on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you subscribe to What Culture Wrestling on either iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from for daily wrestling podcasts. Right, this has been Get the Table. My thanks to the Dadley Boys. Thank you for watching or listening, and we will see you soon.